Hello,
Hello?
hello.
Oh, hello there.
How you doing?
Oh, I'm very good. I'm very good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm I'm doing great. I'm getting to that level of complete and utter exhaustion, but I'm fighting through.
I
Uh,
know I've been falling through. I've got my little kind of Coke and I've got so many sandwiches that I've half eaten, but really enjoying it. It's been a great stream.
yeah, it's been it's been exciting and long, and I think I've experienced the I mean I want to say the nine circles of hell, but I've definitely experienced all the different ways of going through. I think five a.m. this morning was a tough gig, but we've had some absolutely terrific speakers, and I dare say you've heard a fair few of them.
Oh yeah, I
Um,
have definitely.
and I was wondering if you would do me the honour of introducing yourself to the people who are in the audience listening.
Oh, certainly. Well, hello there. My name's Teddy Hope. So I am the trans officer for Out for Indy, which is the LGBTQ plus wing for the Scottish Nationalist Party. And I'm also a PhD student studying transgender children studies. So I'm looking at the way that transgender children become socialized at different stages of development, particularly at early ages of development, but also in adulthood for the way that we use nostalgia and look to the past. So we certainly heard a lot of testimonies on the stream today from different transgender individuals talking about their own childhoods and the impact that education in particular has upon their own social development, and how that actually we look to the past and look at the happy memories, the traumas, and how that actually constitutes and builds your modern day identity. So I also specialize quite strangely enough in media studies. So this all sounds really honcy poncy and deep, but I literally apply critical deep theory to SpongeBob SquarePants. So that's my field of specialty.
And okay, so from a applying deep theory to SpongeBob, give me an example. You're gonna have to give me something.
Oh, okay. Where do I begin? All right. So I think cartoons, in particular for young queer people, are actually a very strong site of identification. So a lot of that is to do with the way, because bodies tend to break down and take different forms, they tend to undermine the way that society genders them, and hence the way they're allowed to perform in a gendered manner. So let's take, for example, if anyone in the audience could actually think, I imagine everyone's watched Tom and Jerry. If they could honestly sit down and think if Jerry was a boy or a girl, a lot of that was to do with the fact that Jerry is an animal. So when when we apply human characteristics onto other beings and objects, we kind of get a wee bit loose about the way we gender them. So, and also particularly when they're just hand drawn and simplified, the way gender attaches to them becomes a bit more abstract. So that's why Jerry could perhaps cross-dress, and it was treated in a very normal context for its era. And even in modern day context, you have like SpongeBob SquarePants. So if you kind of tilt your head and squint a bit, do you ever just feel like SpongeBob and Patrick are perhaps a domesticated gay couple? Like, it's hard to tell. But yeah, so that's what I kind of specialize in, is the way that we cut particularly young trans people who are coming out. Some tend to when a moment of coming out, you look to your own childhood to kind of gain an understanding of where was the root of my own being and my own essence, and that tends to come from the site of little artifacts in your childhood, like per se dolls but also television and films are in itself those objects, so we tend to attach to them as well. So I certainly know that I certainly used my own childhood memories of children's cartoons and dolls to sort of think about, okay, what gender am I as an adult, and where do I move, how do I move in the world, and how am I brought into the world and seen as a human being. And that's when I sort of came out as non-binary, was that look to the past in a way. But I think that's where, I guess this is why I'm certainly interested in this stream as it is, in the sense that I was also as a transgender child, I was very much I was very badly harmed by, not only, I grew up in Section 28 for a few years, so I knew that pain of being socialized in that a very toxic context, and I do have those earlier memories. Even when I was very young, I have one of the very earliest memory I have as a child was looking down at a felt floor, which, you know, that sort of fuzzy felt floors that, you know, like kids in primary school or
Yep.
nurseries, like just to protect them just in case they scuff their knees.
Aye.
I remember looking down. Yeah. So I remember looking down at them and looking at, because I was sad, and because I think I told a teacher I wanted to marry a boy, and I must have been like 4 or 5, and the teacher saying you should not say that, or else your mummy and daddy will stop loving you.
Oh.
And yeah, I had that.
Jesus.
Yes. That happens all the time. That wasn't an isolated incident. I remember like even making paper mache. So I used to identify as gay for a long time, but then I realized I was like a effeminate gay person. But then I realized that there's something more to this, and I realized I was actually trans. But I remember even making a paper mache out of clip magazines and like a self-portrait out of magazine clip outs for my school, and I put a woman's heel for one of my feet, and it was kind of dangling off the side, and it looked kind of funny and fun. But the teacher says just to take that off right now, so I cut the foot off. So it's just those little, you know, small violences that you grow up with that kind of constitute my present day identity. So I think this is why I'm such a big supporter of the TIE campaign. I think it's quite a radical project, and I think it's a very powerful and beautiful project, is to create inclusive education, even from a Scottish nationalist standpoint. Because I certainly one of my favorite speakers, particularly of today, when I was tuning in with my Coke, I was listening to James talk about certainly the role of nationalism and especially like Scottish nationalism, because certainly this is what you're a big part of your stream, certainly, isn't it? Like, since it's AyeforScotland, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to differentiate. I've tried, and I have to do a bit of a disclaimer here. I did reach out to people across the political spectrum. We've had quite a lot of people from, you know, Out for Indie and people who are pro-independence, but we did reach out. I'm not going to say who we reached out to, and there was a brief bit of engagement, and then there was nothing. You know, there was no returned calls, there was no returned emails. I think for maybe a few, and it is understandable, but I think for many the AyeforScotland name got in the way of what we were actually trying to do for TIE, which is a wee bit of a shame. But you know, we did approach people from across the board. But I think you're right when you're talking about how, you know, Scottish nationalism plays into, you know, the sort of mixture of feeling of pride that we get because, you know, we've done something incredible with the TIE campaign.
Yes.
But as I was saying to James, it's like, you know, our work is never done. And we have to keep going. We have to, you know, continue and redevelop and reevaluate and, you know, have the opportunity to reflect, while at the same time sort of carving new paths.
No, I think that's absolutely interesting, because I think the TIE campaign is an ongoing project, and I think inclusion is a journey, is never a state of destination, and I think it's the incredible work that they are doing. I think with the Civic Nationalist Project, I think the TIE campaign comes to the heart of it in a very deep way, as I think what nations are really is, like when you have a nation, you create a collective, and then we are the nation, and there's also someone different and on a part of that nation. And I think the way nations look at themselves, and the way you can actually see how a nation builds itself, is the way they treat their children. And I say this as a childhood theorist, is that we are actually, childhood is always something that is colonized because we aren't actually children, but we look to our past as like, oh, it was this pure, like, wonderful space where, but we also want to protect that space. So of course, we're absolutely protecting children, of course, from real harm and violence, but there's always that mask slips onto the most marginalized groups. So this is why we had the history of Section 28, where we want to protect children from like gay people or like sharing space. And I think like the states have created schools in a way that they actually separate children from the masses, so they can be able to protect them from violence, but also like to keep them away from like, this is why you can't have like openly gay teachers during Section 28, or like you can teach them about gay people and also trans people. So I think so even if you look at even the far right and the emergence of like even with Brexit or with Trump, there was always this look to the past of like, this was my childhood and it was this wonderful place and we got to protect our children from like these invaders. But actually, on the other hand, a civic nationalist project is saying is actually saying no. Like I say this as someone who was a queer child. I'm being silenced, and you're actually silencing queer children and being able to talk and understand their own experiences by not actually allowing having inclusive education. So, and certainly that comes back to my own childhood when I was told my mummy and daddy wouldn't love me anymore. Was like, you're being excluded from the collective now because you're potentially a queer person. And I think that's where certainly the TIE campaign is so radical, is a sense that there's a history of, particularly in queer politics, to always try to be inclusive as possible, but also kind of reproduce those ideals of what like what you should be like, mummy and daddy's together, and like reproducing the nation is very much, the child is very much the future of the nation. They represent the promise of what that nation will look like. So if that child potentially grows up gay or trans, that's seen as a threat to the nation building project. So this is why certainly ethnic nationalism and like far right nationalism is is taking that toxic turn. But there's a very radical and progressive ideal that can be attached to the civic nationalist project, with trying to assert inclusive education and actually including trans lives and trans experience into education, which I think is such a powerful narrative.
I mean, that's a really, really, I mean, I want to call it a perspective, but I mean, it is interesting you saying that, because I could see how quickly the lines were drawn. I mean, my knowledge of Nazi Germany is somewhat limited, but it's mothers were awarded for how many children they produced, which in itself is a very heteronormative like focus on the nation building project, which is interesting. I actually think the award went up to something like 9 kids or something like that. You got a gold star if you produce 9 kids, which just seems like a lot of effort, to be honest.
Oh yes, no, oh god, wow! Like, I don't think I'll be that successful, but I don't have the energy. But yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. Is like, it's very much. From a feminist standpoint, we always look at nations almost like families. It's almost like a family household in the way that like it takes a very patriarchal role. And the traditional ideal of the nation is it's got to reproduce itself and create this future for itself. And the most ideal system under the heterosexual patriarchal ideal is women live in the household and make babies, and it's always this tends to be a white body, but it has to be a cisgender and heterosexual body so they can reproduce more. So I guess exposing the contradictions of that through because once again, like as I said, schools have been developed to sort of fragment time and how children's lives should be built and grow, particularly from an early age. So like even then, like they're put in there for like certain number of hours, like in order to like train them up to work in the workforce at an older age. But there is a very long tradition of, once again, pushing out these potentially queer bodies and queer forms of knowledge. So this is what to get a wee bit academic. I'm trying not to be. I'm sorry. Just stop me if I do.
Go. Be as academic as you like.
Okay. Well, we call this an epistemic injustice, or should I maybe just say like a null curriculum? Is like, I remember when I grew up, everyone knew what a gay person was, but it was something that was never essential. Well, we could talk about it and we could make fun of it, like in a way that it wasn't part of us. It wasn't part of a collective of which we shared as within the school. So it would always be something that is external. And if someone was to emerge as gay or on the queer spectrum, and once again, I grew up before the transgender tipping point, so there was less just trans people were not talked about at all. They were just immediately excluded or seen as pathological or something needs to be pushed out. So when you silence queer people, and stop them from producing knowledge and also growing up with a knowledge, it's a form of violence in itself. As you, even if you look at the history of transphobia, I believe, I'm sure there has been a bit of overlap with a lot of the trans rights debate. I'm certainly dealing with a lot of that right now, as trans officer, as you can imagine. But even back in the day, in the 1970s, there was a writer, Janice Raymond, who wrote The Transsexual Empire. She was a radical feminist, but she wrote it was a very transphobic publication. And because of her writing in academia, it stopped other trans people getting jobs in academic institutions, because her writings were seen as the core value. And also, I also stopped them from also working in like health organizations. So, and because of that, there was this continued cycle of violence that stopped trans people entering public life. So even in schools, sorry, jumping back and forth between schools and everyday life, but
no problem.
But even in schools, I do remember I knew there was teachers who were gay and who were on the queer spectrum, but they were never really allowed to really be seen as open and out about their identity. And because of that, it was that continuous sense of isolation. And of course, when you grow up in that time of Section 28, you do have this fear of just naming parts of yourself and actually being open about it, to the point that you do feel isolated and alone. So to actually have the TIE campaign sort of assert itself and try to correct this epistemic injustice, it's a very radical project which very much opens up the idea of who we are as a collective and who we are as a nation. And I think, once again, I think there can be a wee bit of virtue signaling, and if there's not enough action being done, but TIE is the party that is the collective that is doing with this action, then that's why I support them so strongly. And it's I think it's an ongoing project which it needs as much support as it can in its way.
Yeah, I mean, what you've said there basically encapsulates everything on why we decided to support them in the first place. And I think one of the most important points. You cover a lot, and you're extremely well read on the subject.
So do apologize.
But I'd say one of the most important points that I'm sort of drawn from that is that there is a nugget of your childhood of being told by that, whether it's a nursery teacher or primary teacher or whatever.
Yes.
That nugget has stuck with you beyond everything. And imagine if all it took was them not to say that, and it there wouldn't be this weight, almost like this anchor that's I can see that it's very much like it's very much stuck with you, and it's the people who you're supposed to look up to and respect, and when you hear them come out with something as fucking horrific, if you don't mind my language, as that,
yes,
it's I mean, like hearing stuff like that, I've never heard that from an authority figure, because I've always fit into the I'm straight and I'm cis and I'm just I've never encountered the language, and it's probably a mixture of ignorance and lack of awareness on my part. But it's interesting that there was a teacher saying that to you in primary school, and I think if I heard a teacher say that in primary school, it would probably have gone right over my head. Just because it doesn't apply, for one, but also it's just amazing in a way, in a kind of horrific way, how one wee nugget like that can stick with someone well past their teens, well into adulthood.
No, certainly. I certainly had I know I was also particularly as a very gender non-conforming child from a very young age. I did have a lot of trauma coming out, particularly as trans, was because of the abuse that I didn't actually. It wasn't just even at as I said, that wasn't an isolated incident. I had it. It was all the way through education, even to higher. I was very much policed for my gender nonconformance. I remember even even my late high schools, I was stopped and told off in the school for walking too effeminately. And even
God.
then, as a child, yeah, it never ends. Yeah, I know I'm a magnet for this, hun. But yeah, like I definitely have. I always knew, like, as a child, there was something quite strange in the way I was treated. I do remember I actually had a really interesting conversation about with a friend of mine who came out as trans, but what I knew in primary school, and they had. They were assigned female at birth, but came out as non-binary, and they had essentially they were allowed to certainly dress in boys' clothing and certainly gender non-conform because our culture allows the trope of the tomboy. So in the sense that you can have a wee bit of agency to gender non-conform from a very young age, if until you hit puberty and the patriarchy's like, nope, you're going to be treated like a woman now, and the trash that comes along with that. But then. For assigned male people, you're socialized from a very young age. That's, as I said, I had that traumatic incident from an age young enough that it would have been really young primary school or nursery that I was being taught this idea, and it's and I think that's what this breeds an idea of toxic masculinity within our culture. Specifically, it is the way that we teach young, particularly assigned male boys and cis men, is the idea of how they should behave from a very young age and how they should repress queer modes of being, effeminacy, and how that can be a trauma that leads you up to later, and that comes out particularly at later points in life.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When we talk about toxic masculinity, I mean. I honestly struggle to think of any friends that I had going through high school. I cannot picture them ever, and it's in a way it's a kind of I wouldn't say patheticness, but there is a level of pity that comes with it. But these guys are guys who wouldn't know how to cry, and I know that sounds really weird, but in a sort of, they wouldn't actually know how to process their own emotions, and I think that would lead to frustration, and then that leads to different types of coping mechanisms, and the sort of there's a descent into that. So it's interesting when we're talking about the subject of toxic masculinity, on how it impacts. It impacts the LGBT community, because when straight guys are looking at your sort of more effeminate men, there is this immediate dislike, and I don't know how to say this. It's not like disgust, but there is definitely you're not one of us.
Exactly, it comes back to the nationalist idea. Like we're always constructing who we are. And who's a human being that you can be around, and who is the other, who's this monster that you need to keep away.
Yeah.
So yeah, so once again, I think that's where, once again, we come back to the idea of time. Why it is such an important project is that we do need inclusive education, is because childhood education is an extremely important topic. I'm always this sort of, everyone thinks I'm kind of a weirdo with an academic spheres because I talk about children's cartoons a lot, but I actually say no, children's cartoons are extremely important because you're dealing with a stage of socialization which is so important for later life development. And when you actually mess it up, and when you push and silence ideas within people, particularly from a very young age, it becomes a cycle of violence and a cycle of abuse which they can perpetuate in later life. So that's why I'm such a strong ally for TIE, and why I think everyone who's watching this certainly should donate, is that you need to we have to open our arms in this collective of us in order to queer people. So yes.
So that's it. Please donate, everyone. Please. We just got a donation from Paige, who's in the chat. and she says trans rights. That's the go-to. And she
Yay.
left a comment saying, "Thank you for defending me for my fucking Pokemon post. Big love." I'm not sure what Pokemon post that is. It's probably something on Tumblr where I jumped on board and had a go at someone. But I'm more than happy to have defended you for that. And thanks very much for donating to TIE, Paige.
Thank you very much as well from me.
Yeah, thanks very much from... Oh wait, she can hear you. Yeah. Hold on a bit. So I've got one. In fact, I might have two last week questions, but I've noticed when it comes to the I hate that it's a debate at all, but the debate around GRA reform.
Yes.
There is a particular vitriol directed towards trans women that I now absolutely correct me if I'm wrong here, but I do not see the same level directed towards trans men.
Right. Yes.
And
well, I
was
think
just wondering on a like what I mean, I could be totally wrong there, but like, could just if there's any chance you could just give a brief run through of why that could be.
Oh, absolutely. No, that I can fully explain that. So this comes down to a very patriarchal script in the way particular gender bodies are treated in public spaces. So when you're a trans man, you're seen by culture as transitioning from female to male. So you're seen as almost less than a man. So you're almost treated in a form of you're kind of infantilized. You said, as in like particularly transphobic people online tend to treat trans men through you're just being gaslit. You're not actually a man. You're really just some confused butch lesbian, which is a horrible transphobic, abhorrent statement, and basically takes any agency they have away from trans men and talking about their own identity. So it's less like seeing trans men as monsters, but more as like infantilized babies who can't have their own thoughts and they have their own. So once again, this idea of like treating kids like they don't have, like taking agency away from people. For trans women, however, it's seen as when you're seen in the public, you're seen as a woman, you're seen as an object of spectacle. So you're seen as something to be looked at. This is why we tend to see quite a lot of trans women particularly get pulled onto news nights and talk shows at the expense of trans men, is because we as a culture like to look at women a bit more. And I think especially when you're a trans woman, you're always seen as something almost, once again, coming back to that idea of who are us and who are this monstrous other. So because trans women are a queer minority, they're sort of standing on the line between being seen as a monstrous person or being seen as a woman. So they're always seen as, so what transphobes like to do is push trans women into the box of the monstrous predator other, because they're seen as so coming back, so almost to sum up, it's almost like under our culture, we see trans men as not manly enough to be men and trans women as too manly to be women. So because of that creates two different paradoxes where trans women are treated as monstrous predators, but trans men are treated as are infantilized, if you kind of get what I mean. So, but this also goes against. So there's also this argument that why aren't we platforming trans men? Why this is what transphobes are saying is why aren't we platforming trans men as much as trans women? But the actual fact is, if you look at organisations, within the UK, pretty much all of them that are trans focused are run by trans men, because we tend, under patriarchy, we tend to center male voices a lot more, whilst trans women are seen as objects to be looked at, so they get the public platforms where they're looked at. If you kind of get where I'm seeing.
Yeah, no, I'm getting it, and thanks for putting it in such a clear picture. I mean, I think I kind of knew roughly, but it was the wording that I was struggling with. So cheers for educating me a bit on that.
Oh no, if I need to be clear, I do apologise. I can sometimes be a weak academic in the way I describe stuff, but yes,
it's appreciated.
No, certainly, but it's what we see right now, especially with trans women and the abuse they're getting online. So I've been abused myself in this context. I've had horrible stuff been sent to me whenever I present as vaguely feminine or not feminine enough, and it's really this is why I want to we try to center trans women's voices in this conversation, is that because they're the ones that are being attacked, but it also comes at the erasure of trans men's voices as well. So it's, as a community and as a collective, we are like, it's a very painful time. And I think the GRA reform delay has been very unfortunate in the way that is going to open up a new wave of toxic media for a much longer time. And it means we will have to fight more bigotry and more awfulness in the press. But I just want to center like love and light in this situation. There's a lot of toxicity out there, and I just want to say, if you're a cis ally out there, just like, make sure to check on your trans friends, be there for them, because we're going through a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they'll be telling you that too.
And we're behind you all the way, and we'll speak out. And I think it's important from an ally point of view that we do stick our head above the parapet and actually, fight the fight. We don't we don't want to be seen as the ones doing the fighting on someone's behalf. But I think it's important that the voices are heard. That don't talk to my fucking mate like that.
I know. Yeah, well, I think it's also and I just say to everyone as well, like, it tends to get quite spicy on social media. I really just do say, like, if it is good to not be too confrontational on social media, just in the way that it can be weaponized sometimes. But otherwise, I think what this is certainly what I do. If you actually look at my social media, I'm mostly just talking about my haircut or my skincare or taking selfies. I'd really just try to like keep my discussion of this issue to real life or to moments where I am platform like this. But I just know that it's a lot of transphobia works by almost like a politic of response. So it's like taking what anyone says and then taking it out of context and saying, oh, an angry trans woman said this, and using it to attack all trans people. And it becomes this awful toxic, like it almost becomes a stick to beat an entire community. So I just always like to say, like, just like, I think they're also trying to fragment the LGBTQ plus community. So if there's any allies out there on the queer spectrum, like always like just show your solidarity and send love and be an open ally to your trans brothers, sisters, and non-binaries like me. So that's certainly I can say if you want to be a good ally. We're all together in this, even if it's hard.
Brilliant. And I promise I will not keep you for much longer, but I have one final question I've asked everyone. Given that we've obviously still got a lot of work to do in Scotland. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be the next phase of TIE. They're working on a new project that I think's been announced but hasn't been sort of like laid out in what it's actually going to be. And there's various other projects being worked on, and there's obviously further rollout amongst schools. Not just in the Central Belt, but across Scotland. One thing I'd ask you is, what would you say is the potential for TIE being picked up organically and almost homegrown by other groups across the world who are looking at TIE right now, learning from how they're able to interact with government bodies and get themselves into school? Do you see this becoming a global movement?
No, certainly, because I think the idea of queer childhood is such a very fascinating idea of how we see, particularly global communities are coming together under the rainbow flag. Sometimes sometimes nations appropriate that image in a very neoliberal way for their own capital, but I think queer childhood is almost the limit test of acceptance. It's almost because, once again, we build our nations upon our children. So I think I would love for that to happen. I think that would be a very beautiful thing to see, is it to be seen adopted, where in the sense where, Scotland, I'm from the SNP, so I'm pro-independence, but if Scotland becomes an independent nation and it tries to build its own nation state within a global sphere, I would love to see it TIE being very much included in that and showing like we're a progressive nation and that's something to be replicated by other nation states. So yes, I can see it. I think that's almost a question if we're going to get I think that comes a question if there's going to be further backlash. I think all progressive movements will get backlash in some degree. We've seen that certainly with Trump and Brexit and other like far right movements. And I think once again that will be a tough struggle, because the way children are treated within society and seen as, once again this idea of the fascist image. Fascism works through the image of the child to kind of protect them, but actually but using that to attack queer groups.
Yeah.
I think. So yeah, I'm very much at a coin toss. I would like to see how it comes out, but I think that would be a very wonderful thing to happen if it does.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us. That was a fantastic talk and fantastic wee chat that we've had. So huge thank you to you.
Oh no, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope you do absolutely amazingly and get more coffee down you. And I've had like late night at like study sessions, so I can imagine where you're at right now. You must be sweating buckets. So I do hope you're okay and sending some good TLC and self care.
Well, yeah, my TLC and self care is going to be sleeping for about 24 hours when I finish.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, man.
Yeah, absolutely lovely talking to you, Teddy, and I'll chat to you soon. See you later.
Okay, see ya. Bye bye.